We're talking with Demario Davis and Tamela Davis. Of course, we all know that he is a superstar linebacker in the National Football League for the New Orleans Saints. And oh, by the way, folks, even more impressively, the winner of the Bart Starr Award last season. So we're talking about a quality guy and a quality couple. Tamela, let me start with you. How do you keep things grounded knowing that his schedule is so focused? And it's really more than just that 6 months because it's year round. How do you keep things family focused?
Structure and routine. I think that's something that I've been really big on before we entered the league, before we had children. And so I just firmly believe that if you have structure and routine and you're rooted in your faith and you learn how to effectively communicate, it helps everything go the way that it's supposed to go. Not saying that you don't have hiccups and things like that, but when you have that consistency and you have a plan, I almost create a plan for everything that could potentially go wrong. And so in that, I just really think that helps us thrive throughout the season and even during the off season, because for us, sometimes the off season is just as busy as the season.
That I know, and I'm sure Demario knows it even more so than we do. So how do you, sir, go about making certain that family stays number one, recognizing all the pulls on your time as a star NFL player?
I think it's about just priorities. Number one, my relationship with God comes first. And so every morning when I get out of the bed, I'm going to make sure I'm spending time with him before I start my day doing anything. And then secondly, it's about me being a husband to Tamela. So I'm going to make sure I'm serving her, making sure that she has whatever she needs, that she's keeping the home balanced out while I'm spending so many hours outside the home. And then third, I'm a father. So making sure that my kids have everything that they need from me, spiritually, mentally, physically, understanding that they all growing up, they're different ages. We got an 8-year-old, 6-year-old, 5-year-old, 2-year-old, a 3-month-old. And so like understanding that they all have different personalities, they all have different needs, they all at semi-different phases of life. And so I'm making sure I'm giving them that individual time and not just holding them in a group. And then, after that, that's when my career comes into play. And understanding that the career, it gives us a platform that God has blessed us to have that allows us to do so many other things. And so with my career, I got to keep the main thing. And so making sure that I'm sharp to be able to go out on the field and perform, to be able to not only provide for my family, but to be able to create opportunities for the next generation and helping communities that we never thought we'd be helping in. And so I just kind of prioritize like that, my faith, me as a husband, me as a father, my career, and then my impact in the community. And then that's just about trying to be for us, it's about being a good steward of what God has blessed us with. And I think when you have your priorities aligned and you move in light of that, it just allows everything to kind of fall in place. And then I just think when you move in that type of obedience and that type of order, what God just blesses you with is an incredible amount of grace to be able to manage all of that.
So now, Tamela, let me not be disrespectful of Brother Demario. It sounds like he came out of the box ready as I'm listening to him, but I know you had a hand in all of that. So talk to me about how you guys met, how you sized him up to be the kind of guy he is now.
Well, we actually met at Arkansas State in a medieval literature class, and I had graduated from a small HBCU in Mississippi and had gone out to Arkansas for graduate school. And Demario was in his last year of undergrad, and for some odd reason, there was a class that was mixed with graduate students and undergrad students. And we kind of noticed each other, but didn't think too much of it. And one day after class, we just kind of had a conversation. I realized we were both from Mississippi, realized we were both kind of interested in some of the same things. And I'll never forget one of the first things he said to me was, "I'm a Christian." And I'm like, "Well, what kind?" Because I've met a ton of Christian people, so to speak. But what does your life look like, like outside of what you're telling me? Because a lot of times you find people who can talk the talk, but they're not always walking the walk. And I was just kind of in one of those places where I was just so tired of running into people who just took God's name and took God's word and didn't utilize it in the right context. And so after having conversations with him, I realized that he was probably a lot further along than I was, or like what I was thinking I was looking for in a guy who was faith driven, but he just needed a little bit of shaping and molding and things of that nature to go along with that. And so with that, I was able to identify that he was really a man amongst boys with how he lived out his faith. He's a little bit younger than me, so I never really, I'm like, oh, you're that young? Because he seemed like he was almost much older than myself, with just how he lived his life on purpose, with how he was just passionate about, other people knowing and experiencing God the same way that he had. And with that, we were able to challenge each other, because before we even started to date, we had a really in-depth friendship. And from our friendship, we were able to just really talk about God, really pursue him, really encourage other people, to do the same. And so I feel like we were just constantly shaping and molding each other before we even decided that we wanted to shape and mold each other on a different level. But we were all just, trying to fish for men.
Wow. All right, Demario. Now, you definitely sound like somebody to use your words, the words of your wife, shaping and molding. Who or what influences shaped you, and molded you so effectively early in your life?
Well, I just had a radical transformation that happened in college. So that was just a few years before I met Tamela. We met in 2010, 2011, January 2011. And so I had just came to Christ in December of 2008. And, I grew up in the church and I always knew who God was. But I knew of him, but I didn't know him personally. And so I knew the right things to do, go to church. I kind of knew about Jesus dying on the cross for our sins, just growing up in the Bible Belt. I had heard all these different things. And so if anybody would have asked me, I was a Christian. But it wasn't until, I had the team chaplain spend some time with me and start doing one-on-one sessions with me, that I realized that, my heart was wicked and my heart was far from God. And though I had these good intentions, it's like Romans, I want to do the right thing, but I can't, and I realized that I was a slave to sin. And so just spending time with him and him introducing me to God's word, all of a sudden the scales began to be removed from my eyes. And I realized I was in desperate need of a new heart. And he took me to Ezekiel, where it says, God, take out your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. And I prayed that prayer, and God really came in and filled me. And when he came in and filled me, he lit my life on fire. And I wanted to know him more. I was hungry for him. And not only did I want to know him, I wanted to make known that life wasn't about trying to do more right than wrong, like this balancing act that a lot of us think it is. Like, if you do more right than wrong, you'll go to heaven. But it's really about a life swap. It's about trading in your dead life for the only perfect life that has ever been lived, and that's in Jesus Christ. And I was just so on fire for that. And so, I had been in a relationship. I had got out of that relationship, and I really went on about a 6-month journey where it was just me and God. And I wasn't dating, I wasn't looking. And at the end of that 6 months was when I ended up meeting Tam. And so when I saw her, she probably would have been a girl that I was interested in, but I was so focused on God at that point that, I wasn't even open to anything except a friendship. And so in the middle of that, we became great friends. And I looked at her one day, and God just showed me, he was like, that's your wife. And it was very early on. And I was like, I kind of had a conversation back and forth with God, like, you sure? He's like, that's your wife right there. And just as time went on, he just confirmed it and confirmed it. And I knew it. I was like this. I was so attracted to her. I knew it was either a gift from God or a trick from the enemy. And 10 years later, I'm so grateful to that gift from God. So, yeah.
Wow. For those who may just be tuning in, we're talking with Demario Davis and Tamela Davis. Of course, we all know that he is a superstar linebacker in the National Football League, and I've been teasingly calling his wife Bishop Tamela because their story is such a strong one, an indication of faith carrying them through. Tamela, now, how many guys have you run into who would even early on in the dating relationship reveal that they're a Christian? It would seem to me in this day and time, in this world where things are so deeply divided in the public square and everybody's trying to follow this path or that, not the path of God, did it blow your mind that he acknowledged up front that he was a Christian?
It blew my mind. When I say it blew my mind, it literally blew my mind because, back then things were a lot lighter than they even are now, but they were still, not where they should have been. And like a lot of individuals that either myself or friends would run into, it was a fake it till you make it type of persona, I guess they were putting on. And so it's like, oh yeah, I'm a Christian. Oh yeah, I believe in God. And for me, I think because I knew that there was something more to God that I wanted to experience, but I didn't know how to get there, or I didn't know what that looked like. And it wasn't until I met Demario that he really led by example. And he just really practiced what he preached, but he was also just intentional with making sure that, he invested into the word so that he could deposit that into other people. And so my mind was really, really blown. But the more time I spent with him, I realized that there was no way that he could fake, what he was pouring out. I was like, this is someone who has truly encountered and experienced God on a deeper level. And with that, he's just so passionate about making sure that other people, experience that too, but also understand that we cannot pick and choose which parts of God's word that we want to abide by. Like, God wants all or nothing. And so that was just what he lived. Like, you have to give God all of it or nothing. You can't pick and choose which parts of the word you want to obey. And to see him take that and actively apply that to his life, there's one thing to read scripture and quote it back out to someone and they're like, oh, wow, that's impressive. But what's really impressive when you see someone read the scripture, quote it back to you, but actively pursue God in a way where they're trying to apply that to their day-to-day life. And when they feel like they're failing at that, you see them going before the throne and actually, just being on their knees and crying out to God to remove whatever it is and fill them with more of him so that he is able to do that. And so, again, my mind was just blown.
If I may explore this with the both of you, certainly your story is well known, but talk about maybe some of the challenges early on in the relationship that prepared you for the difficulties that all of us as Christians go through. How did you guys deal with some of the relational challenges early on, getting to know one another, finding that real comfortable middle ground that was going to work for the both of you? Let me start with you, Demario.
Yeah, but by no means, do I ever want us to come across as, like holier than thou or perfect or anything of that magnitude. We're just two simple human beings that God brought together in a way to push us both closer to holiness. Mm-hmm. And he has really did that in our journey. A couple of things that happened to us early on, we've been fortunate that we haven't really had any really intense debates and arguments and struggles together in our journey because of the foundation that was laid. Mm-hmm. Firstly, our foundation was built on God. So there was no, as hard as it was, there was no impure relationship. You know, we walked in celibacy until the time we got married. We both were in a pursuit of God. I didn't pursue her until I was sure that she had a pursuit of God that was stronger than a pursuit of me. Mm-hmm. And then we pursued each other. We started as great friends, so we knew so much about each other and our desires that even if we always joke that if we got married to somebody else, that person was going to have a strong time because we were going to always be friends. Yeah. And so we built such a great communication that I knew her expectations, she knew my expectations. And then I think one of the greatest things we did before when we got engaged was we read this book together called Things I Wish I Knew Before I Got Married. And we always recommend that to any couple because we just found out so much stuff, even though we were great communicators and had a great friendship. We found out stuff in that book that it goes back to your childhood and the way you saw your parents do things and your expectations. And that communication set us on a path that just gave us, you know, a great, you know, early 5, 6, 7 years in our marriage, right, where we just, you know, so much unspoken things that we didn't have to communicate. And we just, everything was just maintenance because there was no surprises. And so even though we had never lived together, once we got married and lived together, we kind of knew what the other person was expecting. And both of us, I think because of our faith in God, had servant mentality. And so I wanted to serve her. She wanted to serve me. And so we wanted to fulfill those expectations that we both knew the other person had. And I think when we have found ourselves in challenging times, or I think the early ones was I was prepared to go to the league. My wife that was never part of her dream. Oh. And so that was an adjustment for her. And so she had to walk through a lot of that internally, and she did that in a mighty way, and as best I've seen anybody handle, but that was a very challenging time. And it was hard for me to be able to help her in a space that was so much internally. And so a lot of it was just prayer and trying to be patient and just give her a little wisdom and reminding her of her strength in that. And then I think a little bit later on, it was as the career kind of picked up, it was so much of me being gone that she needed more out of me at home. You know, and we had more kids was coming in, so it was harder for her to just try to hold the house down alone. And so her calling me to be more present in the home and things that she needed. And so that was hard for me because I had the dream of being in the NFL. I didn't have the dream of being a family man. That was her dream. And so now it was flipped. And she was patient with me in my struggles and trying to figure out, okay, how can I be more present with my kids? How can I be more present with you in the midst of all that's going on outside the home? And so that was a little bit. And then, you know, now we're getting ready to go into year 10, which is
mind-blowing.
Mind-blowing in itself.
It really is.
You know, you change over time, you know, and so that expectation, the thing that had carried us for 7 years, those expectations had changed. Right. You know, we were different people with different visions and different ambitions. And so I had to learn her, the new her, she had to learn the new me, or we had to communicate that and express that. And once we got to that understanding, we were able to get back on track. But I think the biggest thing was that foundation of friendship and communication that was established early on, and that our commitment is to God outside of our commitment to each other. And that triangle, God at the top and us on the outside working towards him, that constantly pulls us together. Yep. And it served us well.
You know what? It may even sound like I'm trying to be a pseudo psychiatrist. I may play one on TV, but I'm definitely not one in real life. But Demario, you just took me through some deep phases there that here you guys have been married. Did you say 10 years now you've been married?
Going in 2022 will be 10 years.
So, but yet significantly, you said that you two also, whether it was growing, you used the word changing, so you were adjusting to her as she was changing, and vice versa, but yet it seems to be strong. So let's get candid here. If I'm not mistaken, at the time we're doing this interview, Tamela is just flying back because you guys, your team, the New Orleans Saints, played in New York against the New York Jets. So she came to see you play. That's a whole different world with athletes. We know the temptations, the lures that are out there. Bishop Tamela's got to be sitting back looking at these little honeys running by trying to catch your eye. Talk about how you guys have dealt with those real world challenges for those who are sitting and watching this saying, come on now, they can't be this real in terms of how they deal with that. Bishop Tamela, talk to me.
Well, I think very early on, we've always been intentional with setting boundaries up front. And again, our friendship has just been so amazing that we don't mind asking each other really tough questions. And I think in that, you learn how to effectively communicate. And so I remember when we started out in New York and, there's appearances and there's places, that they're requesting you to be at. And so if I didn't go, Demario never went alone. He would take a parent, he would take a friend, he would take, he always took someone with him, and not to say that, he felt like he would do something, but it was in one of those things where it's like, you got to plan before you even get there. Because if you don't have proper things into place, then you're allowing room for more and more things and to be tempted even more. The other thing is when people would ask him for a photo, he always put his hands in certain positions to make sure that there was no mishaps, so to speak. If someone gave him a phone number or card, he would come and sit it on the nightstand. Hey, ran into this person, they gave me their phone number, they gave me their card, I don't need it, here it is, just turning that in. And so it was just one of those things where we were really able to have those boundaries early on when it came to, little honeys trying to do what little honeys do or whatever the case may be. And then I think, too, it was just we spent a lot of time together. And so with that, I think it prevents, the alone time that he kind of has when other people are like hanging out and doing different things. And then he doesn't mind just saying no and putting boundaries up, saying, like, no, I can't do this, or no, I can't go there, or things of that nature. And so boundaries have been really, really helpful, I think. And as the years have changed, year 1 boundaries, year 10, they're different. But whenever things are changing or teams are changing or expectations or situations are changing, we're constantly re-upping those boundaries or having those conversations of what do we need to put in place to make sure we're where we need to be.
Boy, I tell you what, I would imagine that you guys ought to be conducting classes globally as we have this global audience out here. I'm hearing she starts off right at the top. We're talking about structure and consistency, if you will. We're talking about boundaries, getting to know one another, changing inside of the marriage itself. Okay, let me hear this, Demario, if I may, from the mother's perspective, when we talk about that very challenging medical situation with one of your babies. And Miss Tamela, for those who have been listening to this interview, I was teasingly calling her Bishop Tamela because she is so strongly in the word, but as Demario said, applying it. Talk about the stiff challenge you face with you all's baby and how you walk through that and how you could be as strong in standing on the word and the promises when you're looking at your baby and what the baby is dealing with.
So a couple of years ago, I guess about a year ago, our now 2-year-old, she was only 9 months, and she was diagnosed with a rare form of eye cancer. And it started with something that we just noticed in certain rooms with certain lighting, certain angles, pictures, but we didn't think it was anything that was going to be as challenging as what we had to journey through. And my family has a history of unique eye color, so we just kind of thought, oh, maybe her eye color is changing or hazy or things of that nature. And we've gone home to Nashville right before COVID, and the lighting was a lot different in that home than it was at our home in New Orleans. And so we started to notice this glare even more in her eye. And it even started to reflect like an orange, I always call it like a laser light, but only from certain angles, only from certain light. And so COVID had just happened, and we didn't even have a pediatrician out in Nashville yet. So we called back to our pediatrician out here in New Orleans and said, we're here. We kind of spoke to her before about it, and she didn't think it was anything, that we should just rush on, being that COVID was in place. But she said, okay, if you guys are feeling like this, I'm going to connect you guys with someone out in Nashville. And so we got connected with Vanderbilt. They called us the next day and told us, that they would bring us in and they would just check our eyes, but they felt like everything would probably be fine. So we thought we were going in for just a routine eye exam just to give us some sort of peace. And I noticed that they started pulling out all these different gadgets and their faces were looking kind of weird. And Demario had to stay in the car because they would only allow one parent in because of the COVID guidelines. And so as they started to do that, one of the doctors just said, I'm a little concerned about what I'm seeing here, but I'm going to see if I can get, an eye ultrasound done. And she started to kind of talk as if there was something majorly wrong, but she couldn't, confirm that. And so we go to the eye ultrasound and they're like, oh, the numbers are really off. We need to get you over to Children's Hospital. I'm like, what is going on here? And they were like, we really can't say, but there could be something major going on, with her left eye. And so they kind of talked about what her life may have been like with only being able to see from that one eye, but never said it was cancer, never, gave us any true diagnosis in that moment. And so they called over to Children's and they said, you know what, we can see them right now. And so I'm sure whatever they talked about medically, they knew that it was something that needed to be seen right away. And so they took us over to Children's, and, I'll never forget, they needed to put her to sleep and examine her eye. And we were there for hours and hours, and Demario's still in the car. And they came back in, and I'm like, is there any way that you could allow my husband to come in before we talk? And they said, you know what, we're going to see if we can make some exceptions. And they brought him in and they sat us down. They were like, unfortunately, we just have to tell you guys that she has a very rare form of cancer called retinoblastoma in her left eye, and it's already consumed her eye. The tumor is the size that we typically find in a 2.5 or 3-year-old. She's already completely blind, and we need to remove the eye. And I think in that moment, I just really was not prepared, for that. Nobody can really prepare you for that, but I just began to feel myself weaken. And everybody who knows me knows that my babies, I'm just crazy about my babies. And as I began to feel myself weaken, it was like something went from the top of my head to the bottom of my feet, almost as if I was going to pass out. And I just really felt the presence of God in a way that I can't even explain it, just give me strength from the bottom of my feet back up to my head. And I was able to sit back up in that chair.
At that particular time, you're telling me you felt the presence of the Lord?
At that particular time, I felt the presence of the Lord in a way that I had never felt it before. Because when you feel that weakening, you just know the next thing is you're on the floor. But when I felt that strength, I'm like, that's nothing that I'm capable of doing. Just knowing myself, I'm like, there's no way I was able to push back in that chair and listen to the rest of what the doctor had to say to me. But I felt it was like a rush. I can't even put it into words. And we sat there and we listened to that. And, we had to make a really, really tough decision very quickly because they were afraid that the cancer had already spread to her brain with the size of the tumor. And they wouldn't know that until they got her back into surgery. And so I think Demario was a little angry, at first, as we kind of talked to the doctor, just thinking, you can't just come in here and give us that type of information. But we went home and, we called friends and we just always just prayed and we prayed and we prayed. And we were trusting and believing that whatever it was, like God had his hand in it. And we didn't know how it was going to unfold. But we had literally 48 hours to tell them, yes, let's move forward with the surgery. And that's some 48 hours. 48 hours.
Now, what's Demario? What are you going through, not only as you're to your baby, but knowing what your wife is feeling? Talk to us. What was going on with you?
Well, number one, I know my wife, and so when she first called me when I was in the car, all the hours before we got the news, she said, "I think something's wrong." And so I just went to praying, but I could hear the fear in her voice. And I remembered, I remembered our oldest child. She's 8 now, and she was 6 months. She had a seizure, and I remember we went to the hospital, and I remember how weak my wife got. And she couldn't handle the news, and so how much she cares about our kids. I knew I needed to be strong, whatever news that was going to be coming. And the fact that we were up there that long when we were going for a checkup, I knew we were going to get some type of bad news. I just didn't know what. And so I was kind of trying to prepare for it, and I was just praying in the car. And nobody is ever prepared. I don't care how much you try to prepare. Nobody's ever going to be prepared to hear one of their kids has cancer. And upon hearing the doctor say those words, and immediately his next words were, "We got to take her eye out because it's potentially threatening her life." It was just so much that was happening in that moment that I think at first I couldn't just be concerned for Tam because I had my own emotions. And so, I was just like, as a doctor, you may not have faith, but you just can't say you're going to take my daughter's eye. Like, God can restore that eye later, but she may be blind in it, but God may restore it. And so, I believe in the God of miracles. And then I just started to think like, I need to be strong for Tam because I know she's not going to be able to handle this news, and so no matter what I'm going, I'm just having to put my emotions on the back burner, and now I'm just trying to be strong for her. But I saw a grace come over her that I've never seen as far as something pertaining to our kids. She was different. She was just different, and I knew God had touched her in a special way because she's so emotional about our kids, and she was emotional, but she was so strong. And she was like, I just know God's got a plan for this. And I just trust him. And that grace, was something very different. And she told me about like what happened in when the doctor was talking to her, like she almost felt like she was about to faint, but then like God strengthened her. And so just knowing he had her hands on her, I think that started to deal with my emotions, and God just started to reveal to me. He kind of put me in a place of brokenness to understand. He was like, you only see me as the God of miracles if I save your daughter's eye, but the fact that you have a daughter is a miracle. And we have so many friends who can't even have kids, and here we are, with our fourth child, and she's healthy, but she has this situation going on. So the fact that we have children is a miracle. And then we were getting a chance to take our daughter home, and you could see all the kids that were still in there and their parents weeping by their beds, not knowing if they were going to make it. And here we are, get a chance to take our baby home, and that was a miracle. So God just really started to let me see that he's the God of miracles. No matter what he does with this situation, he's already done enough miracles. Mm-hmm. And so at that point, I think for us, it just became, God, you have your hands on this situation. We know that. So we just going to pray. We're going to pray over the doctors. We're going to say, take the eye. And we know at the last minute that you can say they don't need to take the eye. That could be a miracle. But if you do, you have greater in store. And so we just really started to just trust his plan from there.
Yes.
So for those who you've given us great detail on the story, and you all have given us great time as well. Let all of us around the globe know, how is your baby today, and what did that do to or for your relationship? Either one
Well,
first.
she's doing amazing. She's doing amazing. A few months after the cancer, she was cancer free. She did get diagnosed with epilepsy. So that's something we're still praying over and for, but she's doing amazing. And we're really able to see how her story has impacted the lives of just so many different individuals at the tender age of 2. And so I'm just excited to just see the many ways that God really uses her over the course of her life to really ultimately bring people closer to Him. And I think for our relationship, it's just helped us to grow, I think, stronger together, but also experiencing the power of God together at the same time in a very unique way has strengthened our relationship with Him, but with each other.
Demario?
Yeah, I would say the same, especially about being able to experience God together. That's a unique experience. I think we've seen God do a lot just for us individually and together, but going through that and both needing to be strengthened at the same time and watching God do that, where I could see the grace that He was putting on her life, she could see the same work that He was doing in me, and you know, the miracle that we've seen. You know, we have a fully healthy baby. I mean, she's 100% cancer free. We're not worried about cancer returning with her. Just have I had all positive reports? Yes, she's dealing with the epilepsy, and that's a different journey that we're going through now. But to see how bold and confident and fearless she is, and you know how much passion and energy she has, and how she's just the boss of the house. You know, it's we're so far removed from that place now, and that's just a credit to and a testament to God and how God took that and used that to encourage and help so many people. It's just been amazing. We recently sold our house in Nashville, and the coincidence was the person who bought our house had the exact same form of cancer as Carly, had it at the same age and everything.
And had the same eye removed. So God is amazing.
Wow. And let me tell you, I've done a number of interviews over the long career the Lord has blessed me with. Wow. Wow. I have one last question, maybe two, and then my colleagues, they may have something because you guys have a remarkable story. You've touched my heart incredibly. When I look at the kind of marriage that the two of you have, and again, the theme being relationships, and boy, you guys have carried us through. Statistics tell us that there's 50%, at least 50% of marriages, all marriages, don't make it, don't last. And when you talk about professional athletes, it's 80%. What advice would you guys have for those who are looking for some help? And more importantly, maybe if you don't have the answer to that, as if I haven't heard every wonderful thing you've shared, what's working for the two of you? I may start with you, Demario, and then give your wife the last word.
Yeah, I would say a couple of things. Hey, you know, we're only 10 years in, and so there's a lot of people who have a lot longer of the journey, who've gone a lot farther in the journey than we have. So we don't consider ourselves experts of any sorts, and we've been blessed to have some good mentors. But I would say the biggest thing that has helped us is our foundation on God. And I know that can sound cliche, especially as believers, but our relationship with God is real. We both have real individual relationships with God, that we chase Him, to know Him, to pursue Him, to please Him. I do that on an individual journey. My wife does on an individual journey, and we base everything, how we raise our kids, to how we make decisions. Everything is based on, rooted in, we want to please God. We want to have an eternal impact. We want to be kingdom builders. And I think that being on that same mission towards God brings us together. And then as far as And I think that's universal for marriage. If you built it on the right thing, it's gonna stand. Mm-hmm. And so we've seen that prove true over our 10 years, and we pray that it continues to prove true for the rest of our journey. As far as the professional athlete thing, we've always just tried to remain real, and we know that the game is not real. Mm-hmm. That's something that comes around the game. Yeah. You look at, it's just as real as Instagram. And you look at Instagram, you see how people put all type of, lifestyles and filters that they want to make everything seem peaches and cream. And a lot of times that's what people think that, the athlete life is like. You're making a lot of money, you got fame, and you got all this stuff, but the lights are going to turn off one day. Mm-hmm. And so we always just try to stay rooted to the ground and realize that we've been blessed. We're going to use this platform to make impact, but understand that this is a mirage. It's not real. What's real is God. What's real is us. What's real is the kids. Like even his home, it's the home isn't what matters. It's the feet that touch the ground in his home. Mm-hmm. Those people, that's what matter. And so that's what we try to constantly do. And it's not easy by any means, but we try to we try our best to remain rooted on the ground, stay real with each other, stay present. And that has blessed us to not get caught up in a lot of the things that you see that kind of take people, away.
Yeah. And I would definitely say implementing things inside of your marriage that you're able to pursue and do from week to week, month to month, year to year. And so I remember when we were engaged, one of the things that we talked about is like we were always going to invest in our marriage, and we would always do marriage counseling every year, some type of conference or something, whether things were good, whether things are bad, but it was just giving us an opportunity to really continue to pour back into our marriage so that we could continue to pour out to each other and to the world. And then also just making sure we were intentional about how we communicated with each other. Things change from year to year based on where we are in our marriage. But at one point, I remember we had nights where we talked about certain topics that could be conflict inside of a home. So one night was about finances. Another night was about how we communicate. Another night would be about how can we better serve each other. And again, like I said, we don't mind asking each other the tough questions, but when you ask that tough question and you get a tough response, you have to go to God, allow him to do the work in you so that you can come back together and actively live that out.
You two are flat out remarkable. To God be the glory